The game of the week of the Pac-12 is on Friday night at Reser Stadium, Oregon State hosting Utah in a top 20 showdown, and there are Pac-12 title implications here for both teams.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights free and soon to be team free, but until then, beloved and loaded Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, review. Please and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Pretty good deal. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. JT Wistrcill is with me, host of Locked On Utes. His team is 4-0 going into this matchup tomorrow night down in Corvallis, or up in Corvallis, depending on which part of the country you happen to be watching the show from. But JT, conference title implications on the line for both teams here. We thought coming into the year, these are both conference title contenders. That remains the case. I talked about with Carter Baines on yesterday's show how Oregon State is playing for their Pac-12 title hopes. Like, if they lose this game, I do not see them getting to the Pac-12 championship game. The stakes aren't like that for Utah. They're not quite that high. They're still pretty high because the margin for error in this league is pretty low.
It absolutely is. I mean, you said it yourself. The conference is loaded, and that's not even opinion. It's an absolute fact with all the teams we currently have ranked. And I do believe the team that Utah just beat, UCLA, will soon find their way back in the top 25 because I do think they're a quality opponent. I just think Utah's defense is operating on that high of a level right now. But yeah, the stakes are incredibly high. I mean, even for Utah, and it's not, we'll talk about the whole Cam Rising situation here shortly, but like, even if you lose this game and like Cam comes back, all those things, like there's no room for error really the rest of the season. Like, yeah, maybe you can suffer one more loss.
I think you can lose twice and still have a good chance.
But then it's so tough to, if you already have one loss, to know like, okay, you have to go 2-1 against Oregon, Washington, and USC, all of which Utah is going to have to do. Two of those games being on the road, by the way. And with how good Washington is looking right now, especially too, I'm not looking forward to that one for Utah. I think Utah can definitely win all of those games I just listed, but they also can absolutely lose those games. And that's without even getting into potential upsets, which the conference is absolutely capable of capping off. So the stakes are incredibly high. It's Oregon State more so. Totally agree with you. Like, it's just hard to start 0-2 in conference play and be like, oh yeah, they're going to make the Pac-12 championship game. But even for Utah, I just think that this is a game where it's like, okay, Oregon State, at least after suffering a loss, they look a little more vulnerable than some of the other teams in the conference. So you're like, okay, if you could somehow be undefeated going into the bye, I think that would be a huge thing for Utah. And look, it's two teams on a Friday night under the lights. It's going to be a really fun showdown.
It feels like it has all the ingredients for absolute madness, not just because these programs are mirror images of one another. Yeah. I think that Oregon State has been building themselves in the mold of Utah. Stylistically, identity, their head coaches are both just under the radar, no flash, all substance, put your head down, go to work, do more with less sort of guys, and they're both really good head coaches, and this is going to be an outstanding matchup. I think a lot closer than what we saw in Salt Lake City a year ago when Clark Phillips went crazy, Chance Nolan got hurt, and it was just a bad day for the Beavs all around. I don't suspect that that's going to happen once again. But from a momentum standpoint for both of these teams, JT, Oregon State is playing with more urgency, not just because of the Pac-12 title implication, but also just from a momentum point of view. Well, like they are currently off a game in which, sure, it came down to an onside kick and they lost by 3, but they were down 3 possessions in that game. Like, Oregon State got a wake-up call. They got a wake-up call last week, and when that happens, if you're a championship-caliber football team, you have to be able to respond, and they're coming back home for their first Pac-12 home opener, and they're playing a Utah team that we all know has a great defense, but offensively, they, of course, without Cam Rising, leave something to be desired, which we are going to get to. I think that dynamic is a fascinating one, and why I lean towards the Beavs in this matchup. Both teams want to win, but who
Are you sure both teams want to win? Are we sure about that?
Yeah, I know. Hot take that both teams want to win. But the better way to phrase it would be both teams are highly motivated to win. But Oregon State, I think you're going to see them play with almost a sense of desperation with where they're at in their season.
They absolutely are. And even guys like DJU coming over, right? Like, as I'm sure Pac-12 championship was what they talked about, but they probably might have even looked beyond that and gone like, no, this is a group, if we buy in and get together, like DJU can say, hey, I've been a part of teams that made the call. I think some of those Trevor Lawrence teams, I think he was a part of teams that made the college football playoff. So there's even kind of those whispers, and you got to imagine that a team that enters the season ranked like they did even says like, hey, we expect to win every game. We know it's what every team expects when they go into their matchups. You got to believe that's what they wanted to do. And that opportunity is now on life support because of that loss last week. So this work become challenging. And this is a very interesting game for Utah. I believe this is the toughest team that Utah will have faced so far. And that's no disrespect to UCLA, but I think DJU is clearly a better quarterback than Dante Moore. And I also think he will clearly play better at home than Dante Moore did traveling in his first ever Pac-12 start, where it was kind of hard to come back from throwing a pick six on you.
It's a pretty rude introduction to conference play. Hey, here's your first Power 5 opponent. Oh, by the way, it's Utah on the road.
Or young quarterbacks, especially Bruins quarterbacks. I mean, there's a 49-3 game when DTR was still young that happened back in 2019. There's some crazy stuff that's happened there. But even let's look back at last year's game. Like, Oregon State did not fare well at Utah. They did move the ball and had success at time, though. The biggest thing that killed them was those turnovers in quarterback play. And I do believe DJU is a clear upgrade for them at quarterback. I thought he didn't play his greatest game last week, but I still thought he made a number of nice throws. And especially, we talked about this on my show, Spencer. If you go back to last year's Oregon State team and the game played out in a similar fashion, right? Where like early on, you start with a pitch that gets bobbled out of bounds. So you got a punt, you have an unnecessary roughness penalty. You fall behind 21-7. Last year's Oregon State team, well, that should spiral out of control. I know what happened last year against Oregon where they just ran the ball for the entire end of the game. Basically, it somehow came back. But
Thanks for bringing that up. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome, buddy. But DJU has the talent and just the ability to lead this offense in like, okay, we need to drop back more. Like, we can score points and have that progress there. That's what he's going to be able to do. And this is a Utah defense that at times has shown the potential in a negative light to give up big plays. Teams have missed in connecting on those opportunities. There was a drop touchdown pass that UCLA had early in that game, and then they ended up turning it over on downs. I don't expect a team like Oregon State to miss those opportunities at home. And it's going to be a really good fight because, as you mentioned, this Oregon State team is desperate, and they got the talent to really make noise against anyone they play.
Yeah, they do. They've got the offensive line. I think these are two of the better offensive line units in the conference, and I think that Washington's is very good. Oregon's has looked very good, but these two units coming into the year were the ones that I was the highest on, and I think that they have thus far lived up to the billing with the way they've been able to navigate the waters so far. I mean, Utah's won 4 games, 3 of them against Power 5 teams, yeah, on the back of their defense, but you have to have solid offensive line play too.
Yes.
You just have to, and I think the Utes have gotten that so far. And I think in the deep play category, you look at guys like Anthony Gould, you look at guys like Silas Bolden. You know, Oregon State does not have the best wide receivers in the conference, but if you're talking about the best deep shot guys, those are high-end speed dudes, and that's a matchup, you know, like you're talking about, that is going to be a fascinating one to watch as the game goes on. A lot of other great matchups in this game. You can bet some of those in one form or fashion over at FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL and college football season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose, with just a $5 bet. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So if you like Anthony Gould or Silas Bolden to go over or under, if you want to pick a Devon Vele, a Jaquindon Jackson prop, whatever you want, they've got it over there for college football and the NFL. This line right now, also Oregon State -3.5. That hook, boy, that could be tough to deal with. But if you like it one way or the other, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season and find the college football betting action as well. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, let's talk about that Utah quarterback situation, JT, because expected to be no Cam Rising again. Now, look, it's a veil of secrecy in Salt Lake City with Kyle Whittingham. We thought he was going to play last week, and then he didn't. And then Utah won anyway. They're quite a good team. But with Nate Johnson or Bryson Barnes at quarterback, rotating back and forth and whatnot, it's a low ceiling offense, and they will need Cam to win the Pac-12. They will also, I think, need Cam if they're going to win this game. So what's the latest that you've heard on that front? And also, what is Utah going to try to do to be more effective offensively? They had just 7 points against UCLA, and that was at home. What are they going to try to do to be more effectively if it's Nate Johnson?
I will say this about Utah's offense last week. I think the worst thing that could have happened for this team offensively, not in terms of them trying to win the game, but just offensively, was them scoring that pick six on the very first play. Because you could tell after that, it felt like Utah was like, okay, we got a lead. Let's just not turn the ball over and give it away. So many times you would see not just a first down run, but a second and long run where it's like, okay, we're going to put our young quarterback making his first ever Pac-12 start and a lot of third and longs against a guy in Latu who was eating both offensive tackles alive throughout the game.
Dude, he's so good.
He's unreal. You had pointed that out on last week's show, how good you thought he was.
Yeah.
But I was impressed with him, especially because Satao Laumea is a guy who and he's an NFL guard, but a lot of people are like, that's one of the 100 best players in college football coming into the season. ESPN said that. And he worked him a lot. And we knew he'd have success against Spencer Fano, who's getting better, but it's just like that's the level of edge defender that's going to mess with you. So I didn't like the game plan. I thought it was really poor at times, just how Utah really wasn't taking any kind of shots or really allowing Nate to drop back, especially because the very first drive of the game, they picked up 2 big first downs off his scrambling ability because he's just that tough to tackle in space. So I was really not a fan of the game plan in that regard for Utah, but I did think I thought Nate still made some of his best throws as a Ute last week. A lot of people look back at the Baylor game like that. And yes, because of the moment and the situation, what was on the line, like that is the best drive we've ever seen from Nate Johnson. But at the same time, that's a drive where even Bryson Barnes might have had success, just because if you look at the difference in how Baylor was playing coverage late in that game versus early in that game, late in game, they wanted to protect the lead. Like, oh, we can't risk letting up a big play. We're going to play off coverage a little bit more, leave a little more of a cushion. That's where Utah was able to dink and dunk and pick them. Not even dink and dunk, but like those 5-10 yards, there was just more space, like quick slams.
Just take what is taking what is given.
Exactly. Which UCLA didn't do that as much. And Nate was still able to make throws and move the ball. So there were times in that game, I'm like, okay, that's real growth and improvement from Nate. Did throw the touchdown too, as well, to Landon King in the end zone. So I thought this Utah offense showed improvement in that game. And I do think that UCLA defense is really good too. So I think they should have a little more success against Oregon State. Not saying that defense isn't good, because I don't think Utah's going to go in there and score over 25 even or 30 points in this game. But I do expect them to have more than 14 points in this one, at least, just because of the talent on offense, especially along the offensive line, as you mentioned. So it would be great if Cam was back. And did you want me to mention?
No. You're fine. You're fine.
I kind of went on
point.
a tangent there.
No. You're fine. You're fine. I wonder if Nate Johnson starting on the road is going to have success against a defense that, like the entire Oregon State team, is better than what they showed on Saturday, and I think are extremely motivated to demonstrate that. And you've got a really good defensive coordinator. Oregon State could not get pressure on Cam Ward on Saturday, and that's, I think, a silver lining for Nate Johnson here, but still, that's a hostile environment. Caleb Williams struggled in this stadium last year, had probably his worst game of the season.
Easily, yeah.
He was easily at his worst. I think that Oregon State defense was better than this one, but still, you have a lot of the same players. You've got the same head coach. You've got the same defensive coordinator. I really struggle to get my head around how Utah is going to have more success offensively when they are on the road against this Oregon State team right now. So is it the offensive line? Is it the ground game? What is giving you that confidence in the Utes offense, assuming Nate Johnson's at the helm?
I think Nate Johnson has steadily gotten better each game. And I even felt like last week, as I mentioned, he showed some signs of improvement. I think he showed some things that the coaches will watch back on film and go, okay, if we get him on the move a little bit more, if we give him an opportunity, like this is a guy, yes, he's had his fumble issues. That's the one thing he's got to stop doing. And he knows that as well, obviously, but he has not thrown an interception yet. I don't think he's thrown one yet on the season, unless I'm missing one. He had one that hit a Weber State defender in the hands that dropped it. But like against UCLA last week, I don't remember there being really a throw where that bounced off like a Bruins defender's hands and it was intercepted. So I thought he's gotten steadily better too. I think the battle up front between the Utah offensive line and the Oregon State defensive line, even on both sides of the ball, is just going to be fascinating, because even though Oregon State struggled to get that pass rush going, there was a key situation late in that game, Spencer, as I'm sure you recall. Washington got inside the 10, and they ended up stalling on 4 downs. They couldn't punch it in the end zone late in that game because the Beavs off defensive line really stepped up with their backs against the wall. And they're going to do that. I think Utah, I don't expect them to start with a pick 6. I don't expect them to be playing with a lead. So I think they will be a little bit more aggressive offensively. I'd love to see them get back to the creative stuff we saw like the very first week against Florida. We have Devon Vele throwing a pass to Mekhi Bernard, who's not there anymore, but a running back doing that. There was 0 jet sweeps last week. That's something I think that you have an athletic receivers like a Mikey Matthews, a Money Parks as well. Get that involved too. I just feel like you said for Oregon State, right? Like last week was so bad defensively, and just even in other areas, you expect them to perform and improve better this week coming off that disappointing outing. I expect the same thing for the Utah offense, because I really think they're like, man, the defense really saved us. And if it wasn't for Jonah Ellis and Logan Fano getting in the backfield as much as they did, that game potentially could have turned out differently because we didn't step up. So even though it's on the road, I do expect Utah to have a little bit more success mounting drives overall in this game.
Okay, yeah, I think more confidence in the Beavs defense than the Utes offense, but time will tell who ends up being correct in that realm. A lot of great matchups in this game, one-on-one wise, but also kind of big picture scheme wise. Let's talk about Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley against DJ Uiagalelei. DJ had probably his worst game as a Beav on Saturday, in a moment where Oregon State needed him to step up. He wasn't able to. Now, the defense also let him down, because remember what we were talking about before the season with DJ. Why can he be more successful at Oregon State than he was at Clemson? Because the offense wasn't going through him. He was a complementary piece to it. And that is, I still think, when he's going to end up being at his best time and time again throughout the course of this season. What happened against Washington State? They got behind 14-0, and then they had to throw the ball a lot more, and that's not where DJ succeeds. We know that because we saw it too many times at Clemson to think, no, it could be different here. No, if you ask him to throw the ball 30 to 35 times, he's going to struggle. And he went 17 to 34 on Saturday up in Pullman. I think he's capable of having a bounce-back game, but you're coming at this from a Utah perspective. Kyle Whittingham, Morgan Scalley, is it, hey, we're never putting fewer than 7 guys in the box, and we're going to dare DJU to go straight drop back passing in this one?
I agree with that. And actually, before we dive into that, I do feel like I owe you and your listeners this, just since you asked me earlier about Cam Rising very quickly on his health over on availability. Look, last week we were told he was going to play, and then at the last second, everything kind of switched to the morning of when Pete Thamel reported it. I would not think Cam's going to play at this point. And Pete Thamel's probably the only guy, if he reported that Cam was playing, I would trust. So at this moment, I don't think you should assume that Cam is going to play until we see him jogging out there for warmups, or not even warmups. He did that last week, but either way. So I on the Cam Rising health, we should expect Nate Johnson until we see Cam out there with the offense. Going back to the defensive matchup piece you asked, yes, I think that Utah is going to load the box up. And I'll also say this, just as a fan of good football, I really liked watching Oregon State, or just as a fan of football, I just enjoyed watching Oregon State's offensive line execute in the running game against Washington State, especially early in that game. You're talking just hat on hat, generating movement up front, running back not getting touched till a couple yards downfield. That happened a lot throughout that game. They rushed for over 200 yards. And look, it's going to be a great battle, them matching up against the Utah defensive line. And I think the Utes know that, where sometimes our D line's going to win, sometimes their O line's going to win. So it helps to then have an extra guy in the box where, okay, everyone else is blocked. This will be the free guy. And Sione Vaki, Cole Bishop, a Lander Barton, a Karenni Reed, even a Leavani Demuni, they've shown the ability to make that tackle when they're one-on-one with a running back. So I do expect Utah to load up the box. But as I mentioned, that will leave the defense a little susceptible, who has shown at times like, oh, if that throws a little closer, or if the guy could just hold on to the ball, that's a huge play for the other side. So that will be the interesting battle. But yes, I do believe Utah is going to put more bodies in the box because they respect how potent the rushing attack is the Beavs is. And I do hope on 3rd and long too, Utah brings blitz, especially to DJ's blind side. I saw multiple times that's how he kind of threw that interception too. And you just get home on him is when he doesn't see it coming on that blind side. And Utah has some athletic guys, not just a Jonah Ellis, who leads not just the Pac-12, but the nation in sacks with 5.5. But you got to play at Utah on whether you're a safety or a linebacker, you're going to be a good blitzer. And Utah's got guys, and I'm not expecting 7 sacks again, but I definitely think they're going to get home a few times.
I like Oregon State in this game because they're at home and the urgency factor, and I still think they're a good team, and I don't trust Nate Johnson on the road against Oregon State in this spot. The biggest thing that gives me pause, though, definitely how DJU has looked each of the last 2 weeks. I mean, against San Diego State, who's not very good, he didn't look great.
Yeah.
Against Washington State, he just showed himself as, Clemson's DJU, and that's not the guy that Oregon State needs him to be. Now, they don't need him to go for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns in this game, a la Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence from back in the day. They need him to be 220 to 250 on about 25 pass attempts and no more than 1 interception in the game. And frankly, with the way he's turned the ball over, I think it'd be a big help to the offense and the defense if he didn't turn it over at all. Obviously, like generally speaking, you can say, okay, over the course of a few games, you throw a couple interceptions, that's all right. But he's thrown, I think, 2 or 3 interceptions in the last couple of weeks, and that concerns me because this Utah defense has just been so good. And defense travels a heck of a lot easier than offense in an environment like this. And I think that's kind of the biggest matchup in the game on that side of things. But I think that's a two-way street because Trent Bray's a good defensive coordinator, and you're going to have a guy in Nate Johnson making his first Pac-12 road start of his career in a hostile environment. And I think you go with a similar strategy, which is we don't want you to be comfortable just handing the football off. We don't want you to be in 3rd and 3s. We want you in 3rd and 6. We don't want you in 2nd and 4. We want you in 2nd and 8, right? Is just being able to stop those big runs from happening, I think is kind of the biggest key on both sides defensively. Like, frankly, as I think about this stuff out loud, talking about it, I think the biggest pivot point in this game is who wins the rushing attack. And if the answer, whoever that answer is, probably ends up winning the football game because that helps their quarterback out the most.
No, I agree. That's what's funny is Oregon State lost last week, winning the rushing battle in that regard. But I totally agree with what you're saying in terms of that's what these.
You mean won last week, losing the rushing battle?
Yes, that's what I meant. Yeah, won last week while losing the rushing battle. But either way, yeah. I think that, or excuse me, I went for Oregon State. Oregon State did outgain Washington State.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, you're going that way.
No, look, both these teams want to run the ball. They do it at a high level. I do think, look, I know the stats didn't look great. From what I saw from the game, I think DJU still made a number of nice throws. And the turnover he did have, I felt like that was him trying to press because they were down. He knew he was going to get blasted and just threw it up there. So if Oregon State, to me, can avoid getting down by 2 touchdowns, I don't expect DJU to make that mistake. Now, if that happens, which would probably mean his offense turned the ball over earlier than that, as much as I like this Utah team, obviously, I don't see them getting up to an early 2 touchdown lead, barring turnovers. And it's going to be hard to force on an offense that knows they're coming off a week in which if they didn't turn the ball over in that one and shoot themselves in the foot a few times, they very well could have won that game still. So I do think it's going to be a fun and a good battle. Both these teams are going to try to establish the run. Both front sevens and defenses are going to make it very challenging on them to do so. So it's going to lead to a fantastic showdown Friday night. Both these teams really want this one. Oregon State really needs it. And even Utah, it'd be really nice to have that extra cushion going into a slew of ranked opponents in the second half of their season. So I can't wait for it to get underway. And I do think I agree with you, really. Whoever rushes for more yards in this game will probably win the game because that's what both sides want to do. Whoever sets out to accomplish their goal is going to come away with the victory.
Yeah, the weakness for Oregon State last week was Cam Ward going over the top in the passing game, and I don't see the Utes.
He hasn't shown that.
Right. I don't see that suddenly sprouting up on the road at a place that is immensely difficult to play. So I want to get to one individual matchup before we get to our game predictions each. And that matchup is the Utah pass rusher's name just went right out of my head. Jordan Ellis.
No, Jonah Ellis.
Jonah Ellis. Sorry. I got too many teams that I cover here on the show. Too many players, too many names. Plus I do SEU stuff. I got too many names rolling around in my head. Jonah Ellis against the Oregon State offensive line, specifically Josiah Gray, who has been starting at left tackle for the Beavs. That's a matchup to me that individually can go towards defining huge moments. A 3rd down, a goal line, go for it on 4th, keeping a drive alive, like whatever you want, whatever situation you want to put it in there. I think that's one of the better individual matchups because He is one of the best players on the Beavs offensive line. The center's very good as well. But I think that particular matchup is really, really good.
It is really good. And you're also talking about not just one of the best players on Oregon State. You're talking about one of the best players on Utah. As I mentioned earlier, Jonah Ellis leads the nation in sacks for all players right now.
Joshua Gray. Sorry. I knew I had that wrong. Joshua Gray.
Yeah, Joshua Gray. But Jonah Ellis leads the nation in sacks right now, 5.5. And it was off he had 3.5 sacks against UCLA, who I don't believe that offensive line is. I don't think it's great, but I don't think it's bad either. I think it's a very solid offensive line. And I just think Ellis is really coming to his own. Yeah, last year he showed the flashes of the player he's become this season. He's really a complete pass rusher. He's a nasty spin move he can throw at defenders. And that's spinning inside or spinning outside too. He uses his hands very well, does a good job understanding leverage, and shows good athleticism and bend around the edge too. So he's very disciplined, and I think he's going to win some of these reps and force some early throws by DJU if he can see him, because he is going to be coming in on that blind side. But you mentioned it. Gray's a really good tackle. So he's definitely going to win some reps as well. I think it's going to be back and forth battle, and all it takes is one. That's the crazy thing. Gray could shut down Jonah Ellis, and if Jonah Ellis gets in one time and forces that big sack on a 3rd or 4th down late in the game, or it's a strip sack, then Ellis won the battle. That's the crappy part about playing offensive line.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. You can win all of them, yes, but if you don't win in that one key moment, that's what people are going to remember. But I think that's a great battle. By the way, my mind was jumping to Josiah Gray, the Major League Baseball pitcher. That's
Josiah DeGuara, Cincinnati tight end a few years ago on the Green Bay Packers now, who I think they just made into a fullback.
I loved that comparison, wherever that came from in the throes of your brain. Let's get to our game predictions here. Oregon State favored -3.5. This is going to be part of the Pac-12 Prime Picks for me. I like the Beavs in this spot. I trust DJ more than Nate Johnson because DJ is at home and he's a more experienced quarterback. I think the Beavs are in a desperation spot. I like them at home, and I just think that Utah's offense is going to struggle to put up points. I think they only get one touchdown in this game, a few field goals. I think final score, Oregon State 21. I'll go 23, actually. Oregon State 23 and Utah 16, final score in Corvallis.
I could definitely see it playing out that way. And if I was to be honest, even though I am locked on Utes and I got all the Utah stuff in the background, just based on what we saw from that Utah offense, even though I think they'll play better, it's another huge, they just have a huge leap I feel like they need to make with Nate Johnson at the helm to win this game without forcing turnovers. And even if they get one, I just think it's going to be tough to force multiple on this team at home, who is Oregon State team that does play really well at home in this rowdy environment on a Friday night. So I do think Oregon State's going to win this game. I think it's going to be very close. I think Utah does cover. I'm going to take Oregon State 21-20. I think Utah's in it all the way, but I think late in this game, it's not just the rushing attack, because I do think Oregon State their offensive line is executing currently at a higher level than the Utah one. So I do think they'll rush for a little bit more yards. And like I said, I feel like DJU is in for not just a bounce back game, because I thought he played all right last week still. I think he's in for a really strong showing, and I think he will not have the flashiest numbers, but I think he'll make 2 or 3 huge plays in this one with his arm, those big plays that Utah's shown the signs of giving up a little bit. And this is one Utah really could have used Cam Rising back for. I think that's what we'll say. Even though I do think Nate will play solid, he's not a guy with a ton of starting experience, and I think that will show in his first ever road start, because he did not start on the road against Baylor.
JT Wistrcill, Locked On Utes, Monday through Friday on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks as always, man. Looking forward to what should be a really, really fun game on Friday night, the best of the week in the Pac-12.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Spencer.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And as always, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.